Su Bingzhe stood before me, his expression full of unearned confidence. He looked me in the eye and said it wasn't the right time for war. I leaned back, my voice flat as I asked if he was suggesting we sue for peace. He didn't blink. He said that was exactly his intention. He was acting like a loyal official sharing a heavy burden, but I knew his game. He saw me throw the war party leaders into prison and thought the wind was blowing toward surrender. He figured he'd be the clever one to help me save face by suggesting it first. He started rambling about how the Jin invaders were just barbarians who wanted money. He claimed our great Song dynasty was rich, and we should just give them what they wanted so they'd go home. I looked around the room. I could tell some of the other ministers were cursing his shamelessness in their heads, but they stayed quiet. I asked him a simple question. Where would the money come from? Our treasury was empty. Su Bingzhe didn't hesitate. He suggested we borrow it from the common people. He claimed the citizens wouldn't mind paying if it meant their safety. My smile vanished. My face turned cold as ice. I felt a sharp edge in my own voice as I asked him a question. If I started by seizing every last penny of his personal family fortune, would he still be so willing? The room went silent. Su Bingzhe began to stutter, begging for mercy and claiming he was just trying to find a strategy. Some of the other peace-seekers had been ready to step forward and support him, but they froze. They retreated into the crowd, terrified by my sudden change in tone. The Song dynasty was already famous for crushing taxes. These officials spent every waking hour dreaming up new ways to bleed the poor dry. Su Bingzhe was the worst kind. He wanted to skin the people alive and hand their blood money to the enemy, all while keeping his own pockets full. He looked confused. He probably thought that because I fired the war party leaders, I was definitely on his side. I stared him down. I asked him what would happen if we gave the Jin the money and they refused to leave. Cold sweat broke out on his palms. He started babbling that they certainly would leave. I cut him off. I shouted the question again, my voice echoing through the hall. I wasn't just angry, I was calculated. I had to shut these people up before the entire court turned into a chorus of surrender. Wang Shiyong tried to interrupt, but I snapped at him to shut his mouth. I told them all that interrupting the emperor was an act of gross disrespect. Wang Shiyong dropped to his knees, trembling. The rest of the ministers were baffled. They couldn't figure out my game. Was I for war or for peace? I looked at Su Bingzhe as he collapsed to the floor, buried his head, and shook. These men were all the same. They didn't care about the consequences or the future of the country. They only cared about their own political careers. The Song dynasty used to have great men, men of character and courage. But after 20 years of the previous emperor's nonsense, the court was filled with nothing but talkers and cowards. I inherited a mess, and I wasn't ready to fix the whole system yet. Right now, everything had to serve one purpose, resisting the enemy. To do that, I had a simple 3-step plan. First, fire the incompetent warmongers. Second, kill a prominent peace seeker to shut the rest of them up. Third, seize their assets to fund the defense. I looked at Su Bingzhe. He had volunteered to be my first target. I asked him why he was silent. He was still trying to play the majority card, thinking I couldn't fight the entire court. He gathered his courage and insisted that peace was the only way to save the dynasty. I laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. I turned to the other ministers and pointed at him. I told them to listen closely. This man, the governor of Kaifeng, couldn't answer a simple question. When asked what happens if the enemy stays after being paid, he just hid behind empty words about saving the state. I realized then that some people have no talent, yet they always try to claim the moral high ground. They act like they're doing you a favor while they ruin you. The best way to deal with people like that is to stay focused on the problem and ignore their diversions. Su Bingzhe tried one last time, claiming our city's troops couldn't hold out. He probably regretted digging this hole for himself, but he had no choice but to keep digging. He thought the worst I would do was fire him. He had no idea how wrong he was. I knew what Su Bingzhe was thinking. In his mind, the worst I would do was strip him of his rank. That was how things worked in the Great Song dynasty. The emperors usually controlled the court by playing different factions against each other, always maintaining a certain level of civility. There was a baseline for political struggle here. You didn't kill the scholar officials. Besides, in his eyes, we had already lost. He figured I would vent my anger, eventually agree to a peace treaty, and he would walk away unscathed. I let my voice soften as I looked away from him. Zhang Shai, I called out. Zhang Shai stepped forward immediately. I am here, Your Majesty. The other ministers shifted uncomfortably. They didn't understand why I was calling on him while I was in the middle of tearing Su Bingzhe apart. You served in the Qinfeng circuit, didn't you? I asked. That was a major province in the northwest, near the border. I served as a military counselor in Nanzhou, sire, he replied. Any other military posts? I was once the governor of the Ansu Army District in Shuzhou, he said. I nodded. He wasn't just a paper pusher. He had actual experience in military administration. Good. Then answer one question for me. According to the law, how should we handle someone who shakes the army's morale right before a battle? The room went cold. Every minister realized exactly where I was going with this. Zhang Shai's heart must have skipped a beat, but he knew he couldn't lie. He took a breath and spoke clearly. According to military law, they should be executed. Excellent, I said. I didn't hesitate for a second. Guards, drag Su Bingzhe out and behead him. Su Bingzhe's face went completely blank. The other ministers looked like they had been struck by lightning. They couldn't believe their ears. In the Song dynasty, killing a high-ranking official was unheard of. It touched the most sensitive nerve of the scholar official class. Sure, the founding emperors had killed plenty, but for a long time, the rule was that civil servants were safe. But these weren't normal times. The Jin invaders were literally at the gates of our capital, Kaifeng. These officials had ruined the country, yet they still wanted to lecture me about tradition? I had already decided to risk everything. I wasn't going to end up a prisoner in some freezing northern hut just to keep these cowards happy. Besides, I had the people on my side. The commoners and the soldiers wanted to fight. By killing a prominent defeatist, I was giving the war party exactly what they wanted. I was also forcing Zhang Shai to pick a side. By having him cite the law, I had tied him to me forever. The peace-seekers would hate him now. There was no going back for him. Mercy, Your Majesty. Mercy. Su Bingzhe finally realized I wasn't joking. He started screaming. He thought his status as a scholar protected him, but he forgot that in a dying dynasty, the old rules don't apply. Another official, Wang Shiyong, rushed forward. Your Majesty, please. You cannot. Quiet, I snapped. Do not interrupt me. But sire, Wang Shiyong persisted. Governor Su didn't mean it that way. He isn't a military man, I stood up, my voice booming through the hall. Did I give you permission to speak? Is there no order in this court? Am I still your emperor? If not, perhaps I should step down and let you, Wang Shiyong, sit on this throne. Wang Shiyong turned pale and hit the floor. I wouldn't dare. Please, Your Majesty, calm your anger. The rest of the court fell silent. They had lived in peace for too long and gotten soft. They thought they could manipulate me like a puppet. Wang Zongqiu, I shouted, calling for the commander of the palace guards. Drag him out. Execute him on the spot to boost the army's morale. Wang Zongqiu stood there, looking like he wanted to disappear. He could feel the hateful glares of all the other ministers. These scholar officials were dangerous. Their pens could ruin a man's reputation for generations. Even a royal relative like him didn't want to cross them. He froze, pretending he hadn't heard me. The other officials glared at him as if to say, if you touch him, we'll drown you in spit. The air in the room turned to ice. Then, in a move of pure cowardice, Wang Zongqiu suddenly collapsed to the floor, faking a faint. Commander! Commander! Several officials rushed to his side, acting like their own father had just collapsed. They knew he was faking, and he knew they knew, but it was a collective performance to stop the execution. They didn't even like Su Bingzhe, but they couldn't allow the precedent of an official being killed. They were desperate to protect their own skin. I watched the ministers exchange glances. I knew exactly what they were thinking. To them, this wasn't about justice. It was about their political safety net. If they let me break the rules and execute one of their own now, none of them would ever be safe again. They wanted to hold the line. They were essentially telling me, Your Majesty, you can exile Su Bingzhe to the ends of the earth, but you cannot kill him. But I had a plan for these actors. Gao Qiu, I barked, my voice echoing through the silent hall. Get out here. The ministers looked around in confusion. Gao Qiu, hadn't he been stripped of his rank? Rumor had it he was back at his estate, dying of a mysterious illness. In the history I knew, Gao Qiu actually did die right around this time. likely from the sheer stress of losing his power and fearing the emperor's wrath. But after our little chat last night, Gao Qiu had found his second wind. He stepped out from a dark corner of the hall. He looked pale and haggard, but his eyes were sharp again. The officials stared at him like they were seeing a ghost. "Gao Qiu," I said, "did you hear what I just ordered?" "I heard you, Your Majesty," he replied, bowing low. I waved my hand. Gao Qiu turned toward the entrance and shouted for the guards. A squad of imperial soldiers marched in immediately. "The emperor has spoken," Gao Qiu announced. "Drag this man out and behead him." The guards hesitated for a split second, then grabbed Su Bingzhe. They started dragging him toward the door. "Mercy, Your Majesty. I am loyal to the great song." Su Bingzhe screamed, his boots scraping against the floor. "Ministers, help me. I am a loyal official." Minister Imo Cho stepped forward, face red with rage. "Gao Qiu, who do you think you are? What right do you have to arrest a high-ranking official in this court?" Gao Qiu didn't flinch. He pulled out an official seal, the seal of the vice commander of the palace guards. In our dynasty, the military structure was complicated, but the palace guards were the elite. By giving him this post, I had made him the top enforcer. Gao Qiu flashed a fake, oily smile at Imo Cho. It was the kind of look that said, "I know you hate me, and I love it." He was a street thug by birth, and he didn't care about the dignity of these scholars. He knew his life depended entirely on my favor. "Don't push us, Gao Qiu," Imo Cho yelled. "General Zhang Shai already said it." Gao Qiu replied coldly. "Anyone who disrupts military morale is to be executed on the spot. Why are you all making such a fuss?" He turned and followed the guards out into the snow. "Your Majesty, killing a minister will ruin your reputation," someone cried out. "Please reconsider. If this is what it means to have a good reputation," I said, my voice cold as ice, "then I don't want it." Outside, Su Bingzhe's screams turned into a pathetic, high-pitched wail, like a pig being led to slaughter. He was shoved down into the snow. The guard raised his blade, but he was clearly nervous. He swung, and I heard a sickening thud. The blade caught in the bone of the neck. Su Bingzhe let out one last, strangled sound, a wet, gurgling noise. He couldn't scream anymore. His throat was half severed. "What are you waiting for?" Gao Qiu's voice boomed from outside. "Finish it, or you're next." The guard pulled the sword free and swung again with everything he had. Crunch. The screaming stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. A moment later, Gao Qiu stepped back into the hall. "Your Majesty, Su Bingzhe has been executed." "Good," I said. "Hang his head at the city gate. I want everyone to see what happens to those who try to surrender our home." No one spoke. No one dared. They stared at Gao Qiu and Zhang Shai with pure hatred. To the ministers, Zhang Shai was a traitor to his class. He had helped me break the ultimate rule. From now on, the games were over. This wasn't about who got demoted anymore. It was about who stayed alive. "Zhang Shai," I called out. "I am here, Your Majesty. From today, you are in charge of everything inside the city. Coordinate every resource we have." "I obey." I looked at the rest of them. "The rest of you will assist him. If I hear one more word about peace talks or surrender, your heads will join Su Bingzhe's on the wall." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the hall, my robes snapping in the cold wind. The sun hadn't even risen yet. The snow was still falling, turning the blood outside into a dark, frozen slush. I sent word to my eunuch, Wang Huaiji, to draft a decree. We were seizing everything Su Bingzhe owned. In the Song dynasty, you usually didn't strip a family's wealth like this, but I didn't care about tradition. I was broke, and dead men don't need gold. But there was one more thing I had to handle immediately, the public narrative. I needed to control what the people were saying. When I reached Windy Hall, a man was already waiting for me. In history, this man's name is synonymous with being a traitor. For 1,000 years, people have spat on his memory. His name was Qin Hui. Right now, he was just a mid-level official in the Ministry of War, mostly handling maps and paperwork. He was a nobody, a glorified clerk. But I knew exactly what he was capable of. And I had a very specific job for a man like him. Qin Hui was a complex man. Before the fall of the Northern Song, my predecessor, Zhao Huan, had appointed him as a minor official in the Ministry of War. Back then, Qin Hui was a loud advocate for war. He seemed full of energy, a patriot who wanted to stand up to the Jin invaders. History tells a different story. After he was captured and spent 5 years in the north, he returned as a different person, a traitor whose name would be spat upon for 1,000 years. But right now, he was standing outside Wendy Hall, waiting for me. He looked humble, even fearful, as he felt the weight of the imperial palace. When he saw me approaching, he immediately dropped to his knees. "I pay my respects to your majesty," he said. He used the formal title for emperor, Bixia, rather than the more casual Guanjia common in the Song court. He was keeping his distance, showing extreme deference. A low-level official like him usually never had the chance to see my face, let alone speak to me. To him, this was a massive honor. I looked down at him, my mind racing. I knew what this man would become. I knew he would eventually murder the hero Yu Fei under false pretenses. I knew he was shameless. But as I stared at him, I realized something. Even a pile of trash in a latrine has its uses. Some dogs are meant to be used before they are put down. If I wanted to survive this, I had to be just as cold-blooded as the men I was dealing with. "Qin Hui," I said, my voice calm. "You've been waiting long." "Your Majesty is busy with 1,000 matters," he replied quickly. "I do not mind. Come, let's talk inside." We entered the warmth of Wendy Hall. I sat down while he remained standing, his eyes darting around, trying to guess why I had summoned him. "The situation is dire," I began. "I remember the memorial you sent me. You said the court needs to be firm against the Jin. You said we cannot let them think we are weak. The Jin are greedy, and they will never be satisfied." Qin Hui bowed his head. "Your Majesty is wise. But," I continued, "there are still many in this city who want to talk peace. I see this as a major problem. Do you have a solution?" Qin Hui blinked, clearly caught off guard. He was just a mid-level clerk. Usually, an emperor discussed grand strategy with the high chancellors, not a man of his rank. But he was sharp. He knew how to read the room. "I believe the people's hearts are our greatest weapon," Qin Hui said. "We must unite everyone in the city to resist the enemy. Gathering their resolve is the first priority." He was right. Qin Hui might have been a snake, but he was a capable one. The city didn't just need weapons or walls. It needed a reason to fight. The previous emperors had left the court in a mess of infighting and indecision. The people were exhausted and confused. "And how do we gather their resolve?" I asked. "By showing them that your Majesty is determined to fight," he replied. He didn't even know yet that I had already executed Su Bingzhe earlier that morning. "I have an idea," I said, leaning forward. "I want to create a new office. We will call it the Tokyo Daily. You will be in charge of it. Every day, you will publish a paper for the entire city. You will promote the war effort. You will call for unity. You will tell them we fight to the death. Can you do it?" Qin Hui looked stunned. He hadn't expected to be handed his own department. "I obey. I will not fail you, your Majesty." In this era, power came from two places: the emperor's political authority and the scholar's moral authority. The scholars controlled the narrative. They decided what was right and wrong based on ancient texts. By creating this newspaper, I wasn't just preparing for war. I was building a weapon to take that narrative back. Executing Su Bingzhe was going to cause a massive backlash from the scholar official class. If I wanted to change the Song dynasty, I had to be ready for a long war against the bureaucracy. I needed my own voice to speak directly to the people, bypassing the officials who hated me. The Tokyo Daily was just the beginning. Existing news channels were controlled by the high officials. They were meant for other bureaucrats. My newspaper would be for everyone, even the commoners who couldn't read. I would find ways to make sure they heard the message. If I wanted to win this war, I needed a massive army. If I wanted an army, I needed logistics and money. And if I wanted those things, I had to strip power from the corrupt officials. To do that, I needed the people on my side. As a great man once said, "If you don't occupy the field of public opinion, your enemy will." Qin Hui left to begin his work. The sun was starting to rise, but the snow kept falling. Across the city, the news of the execution was spreading like wildfire. In a private study, a high-ranking official named Tang could jump to his feet, his face pale with shock. "What? The emperor killed him?" His colleague, Wang Shiyong, sighed, his hands trembling. "Yes, right outside the hall. They hacked him down like an animal." We all heard the screams. To these men, a minister wasn't just a person. He was a symbol of their class. By killing Su Bingzhe, I hadn't just removed a traitor. I had declared war on the entire establishment. That blade didn't just cut through Su Bingzha's neck. It sliced right through the sacred way of the scholar official class. In ancient China, these scholars were a special breed. They believed their moral code was supreme. In a world with limited resources, the empire stayed together because of this shared belief system. A penniless scholar could look down on a wealthy merchant simply because he was a disciple of the sages. They believed they held the ultimate truth on how to rule the world. The Song dynasty had raised these men to an unprecedented status to avoid the military chaos of the past. There was a famous saying, "The emperor rules the world with the scholar officials, not with the common people." It meant that while I held the title, I needed them to keep the peace. But now, I had killed one of them. I had slaughtered him like a chicken right outside the palace hall for a crime they didn't even recognize. To them, this wasn't just an execution, it was a declaration of war against their entire class. Across the city, Tang Ke sat in his study, trying to process the shock. "What do we do now?" his colleague Wang Shiyong asked, his voice trembling. Tang Ke went silent for a long time. "Keep your head down for now," he finally said. "Let's see what Zhang Shai does. If he fails like the others, all the hatred we feel today will be returned to the emperor tenfold. And if he succeeds?" Wang Shiyong whispered. "If he actually stops the Jin army?" Tang Ke shook his head. "Impossible. This isn't a fair fight. We have no chance of winning unless we negotiate for peace and move the capital." That was the mindset of these officials. They saw the Song army as a small child and the Jin invaders as a giant. They were already defeated in their minds. "What about Gao Qiu?" Wang Shiyong spat. He was so arrogant at the execution. He showed no respect for the rights. "Gao Qiu has already crossed the line," Tang Ke replied coldly. "People are furious. Someone will impeach him. If the censorate doesn't act, we'll find someone to give them a nudge." They hadn't expected this. They thought the peace faction would take over after the last leadership fell. Instead, Su Bingzha had mentioned peace and lost his head for it. Now, his head was hanging on the city gates for everyone to see. The news spread fast. The commoners were ecstatic. By killing a traitor, I had sent a clear message. I was going to fight. But behind the scenes, things were getting tense. I knew exactly what I was doing. First, I had crushed the momentum of the peace faction. Second, I had put Zhang Shai in charge to get the war machine moving. Third, by using Gao Qiu to kill Su Bingzha, I had created a new faction of men who had no choice but to be loyal to me. The scholars would hate Zhang Shai and Gao Qiu forever now. They were outcasts. If they wanted to survive, they had to be my attack dogs. That's exactly what I needed, efficient people who followed my orders without quoting ancient texts at me. Most importantly, I had broken a long-standing political rule. For generations, the Song emperors didn't kill their ministers. I had turned a game of demotions into a game of life and death. Why? Because we were in a hellish situation. Without extreme measures, the Song dynasty was finished. I spent the rest of the morning buried in paperwork. I ordered every financial record, land survey, and tax report to be brought to me. Governing isn't just about picking the right people, it's about knowing the numbers. The Song was surrounded by enemies and rotting from within. If I didn't push this empire to its full potential, we wouldn't survive the year. I was deep into the tax revenues when Wang Huaiji rushed in, looking panicked. "What is it?" I asked, not looking up. "The Secretariat, they refused to draft the edict for the property seizures," he stammered. I stopped and looked at him. I was actually surprised. My orders didn't matter anymore. These bureaucrats were trying to play hardball with me to protect their dignity. In this era, the process for issuing an imperial decree was complicated. It was designed to limit the emperor's power. This wasn't like the later dynasties where the emperor was a total autocrat. Here, the ministers still held real power. "Give me ink and paper," I said. "If they won't write it, I'll do it myself." The maid scrambled to prepare the desk. I grabbed the brush and wrote the decree with my own hand. When I finished, I handed it to Wang Huaiji. "Take this back to them. Tell them that anyone who refuses to pass it can pack their bags and leave. I'll replace them with someone who will. And make sure you write down the names of everyone who complies. I want to know who is on my side." It was that simple. They wanted to talk about integrity. If they had so much integrity, they should be out on the city walls fighting the Jin, not arguing with me over paperwork. "Yes, Your Majesty," Wang Huaiji said, bowing low. One more thing, I called out as he turned to leave. Find the man who actually swung the blade to kill Su Bingja this morning. Bring him to me. I spent the rest of the morning digging through the tax records. Even after hours of work, I had only scratched the surface of the Empire's financial mess. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized a fundamental problem. The officials in this court had a massive ideological rot. If I wanted to issue new policies or edicts to save the world, I couldn't be looking over my shoulder to see if some low-level clerk in the Secretariat approved of my tone. The rules had to change. Or better yet, the people had to be replaced. In times of peace, you can afford to play the long game. You can be patient. You can debate. But we weren't in a time of peace. A massive military crisis was at our doorstep, and the Empire was facing total collapse. If these bureaucrats wanted to keep playing games while the world burned, they shouldn't blame me for what came next. I needed to build a circle of loyalists. Without men I could trust, even the smallest task would become an uphill battle. Your Majesty, the man you requested is outside, a voice called out. A young man entered the windy hall after handing over his weapons. He knelt before me, his eyes fixed on the floor. I am told you are the one who executed Su Bingja, I said. The young man's heart sank. I could see the fear in his posture. He probably thought I was about to kill him to appease the scholars, the classic move of killing the donkey once the grinding is done. It was me, Your Majesty, he whispered. What is your name? My name is Jing Chao. Jing Chao. The name struck a chord in my memory. In the original timeline, Jing Chao was a low-level imperial guard. After the fall of the Northern Song, he ended up serving the puppet regime of the Jin. But when Yu Fei eventually attacked, Jing Chao refused to surrender. He fought to the bitter end and committed suicide by jumping off a cliff rather than betraying the man who had promoted him. He was a man of immense physical strength, a warrior of 10,000, and fiercely loyal to those who showed him kindness. He was exactly what I needed. What is your current rank? I asked. I am a minor commander of the guard, Your Majesty. It was a bottom-tier position. Basically a nobody in the grand hierarchy of the Forbidden City. From this moment on, I declared, you are the Capital Guard Commissioner. Jing Chao froze. He looked like he'd been hit by lightning. To put this in perspective, he had just jumped 6 ranks in a single breath. It was the equivalent of going from a local village official to a top-tier minister overnight. It was unheard of. Why did I do it? Simple. I needed to show everyone exactly what happens when you follow my orders without hesitation. I wanted them to see the rewards of loyalty. Plus, I needed some real teeth in the Imperial Guard. My uncle, Wang Zongchu, was a stubborn, useless fool, but I'd keep him around for now. Even trash has its uses if you put it in the right bin. What's the matter? I asked, my voice dropping an octave. Are you unwilling? Jing Chao snapped out of it, hitting his head against the floor in a deep kowtow. This humble servant. I am unworthy of such grace, Your Majesty. This isn't a comfortable job, Jing Chao. There will be many more people to kill in the future. Are you prepared for that? If the Emperor commands it, I will walk through fire and blades, he shouted, his voice trembling with excitement. Good. That's the kind of man I need. Go, get your new uniform. As he left, I felt a small sense of relief. Another fong added to my mouth. An emperor without his own hounds is just a target. Meanwhile, Wang Huaiji returned, drenched in sweat. He told me the ministers had been stubborn to the point of madness. The clerks in the Secretariat had been quoting the classics and talking about dying before submitting. But after I fired and replaced 3 of them in a row, the rest suddenly found their pens. The edict was drafted. By noon, the official decree was posted across the city. It listed Su Bingja's crimes in agonizing detail and announced the punishment, the total seizure of his estate. Gao Qiu didn't even stop to eat lunch. He led his men to Su's mansion with a swagger I hadn't seen before. They kicked the family out and began stripping the place bare. Gold, silver, priceless paintings, everything was hauled out. For many of the guards, this was the first time they'd ever participated in a legal looting of a high official's home. Gao Qiu, being the clever fox he is, misplaced a few items along the way to distribute among his men. It was a bribe, plain and simple, to ensure their loyalty. Commander Gao, one guard whispered, clutching a silver ingot. Please, lead us on more raids like this soon. I looked the other way. As long as the bulk of the wealth made it to the treasury, I didn't care about a few scraps. I even let the women of the Sioux household go free. I wasn't a monster. I was just a man trying to fund a war. By the end of the day, the capital was buzzing. People gathered in the streets to cheer. The execution of a traitor and the seizure of his wealth had set the city's spirit on fire. The peace faction, in the court, who had been so loud the night before, suddenly went silent. They retreated into their homes, terrified that they might be next. It was now the 27th day of the 11th month. My third day in this world. I had finished reviewing most of the tax records when Zhang Shai arrived with his defense plan for the city. It was solid. He planned to station 10,000 men at each gate, with a mobile reserve ready to move where needed. He was organizing grain supplies and mobilizing the common people to haul stones and oil. It was the same strategy used during the first defense of the city, and it worked. The Song had the most advanced defensive weapons in the world and the strongest walls ever built. Even Constantinople would look weak compared to the fortifications of Kaifeng. But I wasn't just going to sit in the palace and read reports. Prepare my carriage, I told Zhang Shai. We're going to the walls. I didn't go there to micromanage the troops. I went there to pay them. The imperial treasury was tight, and the guards hadn't seen a paycheck in months. You can't ask a man to die for an empire that won't even feed his family. It was time to show the soldiers that their emperor actually gave a damn. As a business owner, you can't expect your employees to work if you don't pay them. The soldiers in Kaifeng were no different. Every one of them had a family to feed and mouths to house. Providing for one's family is the harsh reality of adult life, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I ordered a convoy to transport mountains of copper coins directly from the national treasury. We split up to cover more ground. I headed toward the south gate personally. I wanted to hand out the pay myself to boost morale where it mattered most. As I rode through the streets, I saw the desperation of the people. Civilians were everywhere, clutching wooden sticks or kitchen knives. Some pushed wooden carts loaded with jagged stones. The order of the city was crumbling. I passed a wine shop and heard a man wailing inside. We're finished. We can't win. Everyone run for your lives. He was clearly drunk, but his words hung heavy in the air. The people around him looked lost, their faces etched with worry. Where is there left to run? Someone muttered. The Jin invaders have blocked every exit. Didn't the court order us to fight? Another asked. They even executed a high official who wanted to surrender. I think it was the prefect of Kaifeng. So what if they killed him? The drunk shouted back. Does killing one official kill the Jin army? The atmosphere was suffocating. People were mourning the loss of the old Kaifeng, a city of peace where, even in the dead of winter, crowds would gather to admire the snow and sip tea. Now, no one cared about the scenery. Even the famous brothels outside the East Flower Gate, once bursting with life, were deserted. I watched a group of men marching toward the city walls. They were volunteers, local militia gathered to support the defense. They still believed they could drive the enemy back and save their homes. But I had to admit, the overall mood was grim. The Song army had suffered defeat after defeat for years. People were numb to failure. The idea that the Jin were invincible had taken root in their hearts. At this point, they didn't dream of their old lives anymore. They just prayed to survive. I took it all in. I heard the cries of despair from the taverns, but I didn't blame them. They were just ordinary people. If regular people get discouraged by small hardships, how could they not feel broken in the face of a national catastrophe? As I rode further, the old prosperity of the capital seemed to have vanished entirely. All that remained was weight, oppression, and pain. A light snow began to fall from the low, heavy clouds. I heard dogs barking and a sudden commotion up ahead. We will win, someone shouted loudly. We will defeat the Jin thieves. We must protect our homes. For our children, we fight to the end. Then, I heard a high, youthful voice join in. I looked toward a nearby house and saw a small head poking out of a window. It was a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. His face was flushed red, but he was screaming at the top of his lungs, "Protect our home!" A wave of relief washed over me. The spirit of the people was still there. It just wasn't unified yet. Once Qin Hui got the daily newspaper running, I planned to write articles in plain, simple language. I would tell everyone that we could win, that we just needed time and patience. If I could harness the will of the people, we would be invincible. That thought eased my anxiety, but it didn't last long. As we neared the south gate, I heard screams. Several men in soldier uniforms burst out of a house, carrying bundles. A man ran out after them, cursing. "You cowards! You have the nerve to rob me? Go fight the Gene if you're so brave. You animals!" A 12-year-old boy suddenly lunged forward, grabbing one of the soldiers. "That's all the food we have. What are you doing? If you take it, we'll starve. Get lost." The soldier punched the boy hard. The kid cried out in pain but didn't let go. Instead, he sank his teeth into the soldier's arm. The soldier shrieked and the others swarmed in, dragging the boy off and kicking him mercilessly. The father threw himself over his son to shield him from the blows. "There's a war on," one soldier barked as he kicked the father. "We're here on Imperial orders to collect supplies. You dare defy the Emperor's command. You want to die?" I stared at the scene, then at their uniforms. These were men from the Imperial Guard. This was the state of the military at the end of the Northern Song, or at least a large portion of it. After years of neglect, the Imperial Guard was essentially broken. History books weren't lying. During the Second Siege of Kaifeng, many guards didn't even man the walls. They just used the chaos to rob the citizens like common bandits. My blood boiled. This is outrageous. "Jing Chao, take your men and bring those bastards to me." "Yes, sire," Jing Chao replied. Having a man like him around was a blessing. I left the intelligence work and property seizures to Gao Qiu, but for direct action, I needed Jing Chao. He and 10 guards charged forward, pinning the looters to the ground. One of the looters actually tried to laugh it off. "Hey, easy. We're on the same side. We're Imperial Guards from the Infantry Command." "Shut your mouth," Jing Chao growled. I dismounted and walked toward the injured boy. A crowd was starting to gather. As I reached out to help him up, the boy flinched, shrinking into his father's arms. The father looked at my expensive robes and the armed men behind me and realized I was someone powerful. He scrambled back, clutching his son tight. As a man from the 21st century, being feared like this felt wrong. But I had to accept the reality. I was the emperor. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. The boy shook his head bravely. He was only 12. In my old world, he'd be in middle school, protected by his parents and teachers. I looked at him, then thought of the little girl I'd seen in the window earlier. When war comes, the common people always pay the highest price. I patted his head and managed a small smile. "You're very brave." Then, I turned to the soldiers. The smile vanished. My face went cold as ice. "It's the Emperor," someone whispered. The looters turned pale. They immediately dropped to their knees, trembling violently. In the Song dynasty, commoners weren't strictly required to kneel to the emperor, but these men were terrified. "Who gave you permission to rob the people?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. 8 grown men, all armed, robbing a single family. They stammered, sweat pouring down their faces. "Speak. Who ordered this?" I had just been thinking about how the people's hearts were with me. I had been planning a great unification to save the city. And then, in an instant, my own soldiers had slapped me in the face with their brutality. Reporting to your majesty," one stammered. We were told by our superiors to collect grain. We were just following orders." Collect grain. I felt a vain throb in my temple. Do you think I'm an idiot? I didn't know the difference between requisitioning and robbery. To these men, it was a fine line. To me, it was a crime. "We were just requisitioning grain," they stammered. I glanced at Zhang Shai. He didn't blink. "Your Majesty," he said calmly, "I haven't issued any orders to collect grain from the citizens." On paper, the government was desperate for food. Issuing an edict to collect supplies from the people seemed like the logical move. But logic is a dangerous thing in a failing empire. Collecting grain isn't a math problem. It's a sociology problem. You don't just click a button and watch the numbers go up. The moment the court orders a collection, every corrupt official and petty officer sees a chance to loot. If I asked for 20 pounds of grain, those bastards would demand 40, pocket the difference, and then come crying to me that the people are too poor to give anything. If we squeezed the people now, while the Jin army was at the gates, the citizens would rebel before the enemy even climbed the walls. I thought of the Ming dynasty's collapse, the final burdens that broke the camel's back. I couldn't let that happen here. "Then how do we get food?" I asked. "We buy it," Zhang Shai replied. Money is standard. It can be tracked, recorded, and audited. One of the kneeling soldiers piped up, trembling. It was Officer Zhang. Zhang Jingwen told us to do this. Which unit? Zhang Shai snapped. The Tianmu Corps, Your Majesty. Part of the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard was supposed to be my elite defense, stationed right here in the capital. Zhang Shai promised to investigate, but I was done talking. I didn't need a report. I needed an example. Take them to the south gate. I ordered, waving my hand dismissively. Behead all 8 of them. Display their heads to the city as a warning. The soldiers collapsed, wailing for mercy, their foreheads hitting the dirt in desperate prayers. Jing Chao, my commander, looked at me with a mix of awe and terror. He probably thought I'd developed a taste for blood. He didn't hesitate, though. He was my tool for the dirty work, and he'd learned exactly how I operated after we executed Su Bingxia. We marched to the south gate, the same spot where I'd executed the fraud Guijing days ago. The air was freezing. When we arrived, the guards stood at attention, led by General Zhang Bofen. I climbed the city wall and looked at the tired, shivering soldiers. Men, I shouted, my voice carrying over the wind. You've worked hard. I know how difficult it is to hold this city in this weather. I didn't come here today just to watch you. I came to pay you. The silence was broken by a sudden, electrified gasp. A young soldier, maybe 18, started laughing with pure joy. Long live the Emperor, he screamed. The cry spread like wildfire. Long live the Emperor. Long live the Emperor. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Men with frostbitten faces were smiling. The older veterans looked relieved, likely thinking they could finally buy enough rice to feed their families for another week. I raised my hand to quiet them. I walked over to a heavy wooden chest, grabbed an axe from Zhang Bofen, and swung with everything I had. The lock shattered. I kicked the lid open, revealing the glint of silver. This is what you've earned, I told them. I promise you, the court will never withhold your pay again. If you want people to fight for you, you have to meet their basic needs. My performance worked perfectly. Morale didn't just improve, it exploded. Zhang Shai began organizing the distribution, and for the first time, these low-ranking soldiers felt like they were being treated as human beings. But a king must show both kindness and cruelty. I turned my cold gaze to the 8 looters. They were dragged forward, screaming, in front of the entire garrison. Zhang Shai stepped up and announced their crimes. These men robbed the very people they were sworn to protect. By military law, the penalty is death. Jing Chao gave the signal. 5 heads rolled with the first strike. The other 3 took a second blow to finish the job. Blood soaked into the frozen earth. Carry the heads to every gate, I commanded. Let every soldier in this city know what happens to thieves. I turned to Gao Qiu. Send your men into the city. Find any other soldier who thinks he can prey on the citizens. Gao Qiu bowed low, his energy renewed. He looked like a man who had found a second lease on life. He scurried off to do my bidding. I stood on the wall, looking out at the Jin camp in the distance. When was their last assault? 5 days ago, Your Majesty, Zhang Shai answered. 5 days. The city was quiet, but the air felt heavy. The soldiers around me stood straighter now, emboldened by the silver in their pockets and terrified by the blood on the ground. I returned to the palace. The Jin hadn't attacked in days, which meant the next assault would be brutal. This was a psychological war now. If I could hold out until the weather warmed up, the Jin would be forced to retreat. I had to play this perfectly. I sat at my desk in the Wendy Hall and picked up my brush. I began to write a treatise on the war between the Song and the Jin. I wasn't just writing for myself. I was going to publish our entire strategy. I would list the Jin's strengths and weaknesses, our own advantages, and our long-term plan for a war of attrition. I wanted the enemy to see that the Song war machine had finally woken up. I wanted to give the peace faction within the Jin court the ammunition they needed to argue for a withdrawal. I was playing my hand face up. It was a gamble, but in a war of nerves, sometimes the boldest move is to show the enemy exactly how you intend to win. I had been writing for an hour when Wang Huaiji entered. Your Majesty, Zhang Shai has captured the officer, Zhang Jingwen. He placed a confession on the desk. I didn't look up. I had more to write. The real battle was just beginning. I needed a break. I rubbed my temples, trying to soothe the dull ache behind my eyes, before picking up the confession Zhang Shai had delivered. As I read, My face darkened. This is ridiculous. I slammed the papers onto the desk. Wang Huaiji, standing nearby, jumped at the sudden noise. The Secretariat was supposed to be managing the city's affairs, but instead, they were playing games. A mid-level official in the Bureau of Military Affairs had actually taken it upon himself to collect grain from the common people. This wasn't just a policy error, it was a political hit job. A servant announced that Gao Qiu was outside. I told him to enter. Gao Qiu walked in looking like a prize student waiting for a gold star from his teacher. He eagerly handed me a report. Your Majesty, these are the cases of soldiers looting in the city that my men gathered. I've already warned the palace command to keep their people in line. I even caught a few looters myself and gave them a proper thrashing on the spot. He was getting good at reading my moods. He knew I wanted order, and he was desperate to please. You did well, I said. I only did my duty, Your Majesty, he replied, bowing low. I opened his report. Good Lord, Gao Qiu's handwriting was hideous. But the content was worse. He had documented 22 cases of looting, and I knew that was just the tip of the iceberg. The city was sliding into chaos, and yet, some of my officials were using that chaos to further their own agendas. This went deeper than just one official. The Bureau of Military Affairs was involved. This wasn't just about grain. I could smell the stench of a power struggle. The men in the capital's core departments weren't stupid. They knew that collecting grain from the public was just a polite term for state-sponsored robbery. So why do it? Because Zhang Shai had just taken over military and civil defense. If the soldiers started extorting the citizens, the peace faction would immediately file petitions accusing Zhang Shai of negligence. They wanted to ruin the man I had put in charge. They hadn't issued any formal documents for this grain collection because they knew Zhang Shai would never sign off on it. Instead, they whispered in the ears of the lower-ranking officers, encouraging them to take what they wanted. It was a trap designed to discredit my leadership and line their own pockets. Under normal circumstances, you don't mess with the army when an enemy is at the gates. But I wasn't going to let this slide. I didn't need to purge the whole army, just a few key heads to set an example. If I didn't stop the looting now, the people would turn on me. But if I took out the corrupt officials and the rogue officers, the rest of the city would see I was serious about protecting them. I had just paid the troops 3 months' salary. My prestige was at its peak. If I was going to move, it had to be now. But first, I needed a fall guy. Go and bring Feng Xie to me, I told Wang Huaiji. My voice was low and dangerous. He didn't hesitate. He scrambled out of the room immediately. I turned my gaze back to Gao Qiu. He was trembling, sensing the storm brewing. Gao Qiu, take the palace guards and clean house. If I ever find out you're using soldiers to build your private villas again, I'll hang your head from the city gates alongside the traitors. Yes, yes. I hear and obey, he stammered. You've done well lately, I added, softening my tone just enough to keep him motivated. Keep focusing on the palace guards. I'm going to be expanding your ranks soon. He thanked me profusely and beat a hasty retreat. I could see the pressure was getting to him. Under the previous emperor, Gao Qiu was a useless sycophant. But with a sword hanging over his neck, he had transformed into a hard-working soldier. Fear is a powerful motivator. A short while later, Feng Xie, the head of the Bureau of Military Affairs, arrived. He was the top man in the department, the one responsible for everything from troop movements to weapon procurement. I see the moment I promote Zhang Shai, your people start causing trouble, I said, my voice cold. I threw the confession at his feet. Read it. Feng Xie picked up the papers, his hands shaking. As he read, sweat began to pour down his face. Your Majesty, are you going to tell me you didn't know? I interrupted. He was speechless. He probably didn't know, but that was the problem. He was the head of the office. His subordinates' actions were his responsibility. I am guilty, he whispered. You certainly are, I snapped. If you can't even control your own clerks, what use do I have for you? I will dismiss the official in charge, Lu Qingqi, immediately, Feng Xie promised. Dismiss him? I leaned forward. You think a simple firing is enough to scare these people? Your Majesty, please, you cannot kill any more officials. Everyone is living in fear. In fear. I stood up, my anger boiling over. Who is in fear? I just came from the streets. The common people are ready to fight the Jin. The soldiers are ready to die for the song. The only people living in fear are the useless bureaucrats who spend their time plotting against me instead of doing their jobs. I grabbed a teacup from my desk and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall with a sharp crack. Do they really think I won't kill them just because the enemy is outside? I shouted. Do they think they're indispensable? Your Majesty, if you kill too many, the government will collapse. Enough. I cut him off. You're finished as the head of the bureau. I'll handle Lu Qingqi myself. And don't worry about his position. There are plenty of people waiting in line to take it. The Song dynasty had no shortage of officials. In fact, we had too many. 7 out of 10 were sitting in honorary positions doing absolutely nothing while the state paid their salaries. It was a system designed to keep the scholar class happy and loyal, but it had turned the empire into a bloated, slow-moving beast. I could kill 100 officials today and have 100 more ready to start tomorrow. Feng Xie looked defeated. He slowly took off his official seal and placed it on my desk. I thank your Majesty for your mercy, he said, bowing one last time. I didn't even look at him. Feng Xie was a mediocre man, a by-the-books official who was utterly useless in a crisis. I needed lions, not sheep. Let them plot. Let them scheme. I was ready for them. I was an expert at framing people for their crimes. I looked at Feng Xie and let out a heavy sigh, my expression softening. My voice turned gentle, almost fatherly. I told him that I knew he had it hard. The city was in chaos, and people were panicking. I told him I didn't want to make things difficult for him. When Feng Xie heard this, tears streamed down his old face. He actually felt touched. He probably thought I still cared about him, that I was a good emperor who was only lashing out because I was under too much pressure. This was the art of ruling. I had just cursed him out and stripped him of his power, yet I made him leave feeling like I was the hero. I told him to go home and rest. I promised him that I would handle the mess and that the country would still have a use for him in the future. He wiped his eyes, bowed, and retreated. The second he was out the door, my face went cold. I called for my attendants. Wang Huiji hurried in. I handed him a list and told him to have the Imperial Palace Department arrest every single person on it. I wanted them interrogated immediately. Once they were done, they were to be processed through the Court of Judicial Review. I want their heads on the city walls by tomorrow morning, I said. Wang Huiji took a sharp breath. He nodded and turned to go, but I stopped him. I told him to seize their assets. All of them. I told him not to make things too hard on their families. Leave them enough to eat, but take the rest. Wang Huiji hurried off to arrange the executions. He was probably wondering why my temper had grown so much over the last few days. News of the bureau chief's resignation hit the city like a tidal wave. This was a massive political shift. The position of vice premier was already vacant after He Li was dismissed. Zhang Shai was currently the Minister of War and Vice Chief of the Bureau, but he wasn't the vice premier yet. This meant the heads of both the Secretariat and the Bureau were gone. The officials were losing their minds. They wondered what I was doing. Why was I firing everyone without appointing replacements? But I wasn't in a hurry. We were at war. The title of vice premier wasn't as important as results. I already had people in mind for those top spots. One was here in Dongjing, and one was far away. Besides, appointing a new bureau chief now would only get in Zhang Shai's way. Taking out Feng Xie was a calculated move to give Zhang Shai total control over the defense. But I wasn't done. The Imperial Palace Department didn't just arrest Lu Qingqi. They grabbed 2 of his top officials as well. They were dragged straight to the interrogation rooms without even a chance to beg for mercy. People were shocked. The Imperial Palace Department was supposed to be an intelligence agency, but suddenly, they were acting like judge, jury, and executioner. By that evening, Lu Qingqi's crimes were posted publicly. He had issued unauthorized grain orders and spread rumors to cause a panic. The punishment was simple: execution and the seizure of his estate. Whenever I mentioned seizing estates, Gao Qiu got excited. He looked more thrilled than a man heading to a brothel. I was excited, too. I had just spent a fortune on the troops, and I desperately needed the gold. Nobody needed money more than I did. The next morning, November 30th, my 5th day in this world, 5 new heads were spiked on the city walls. They belonged to Lu Qingqi, his 2 officials Zhang He and Yang Zhong, and 2 military commanders named Li Ping and Wang Yun. I didn't kill them just for the sake of killing. I killed them to prevent more death. It was a simple philosophy. You kill a few to terrify the many. If I didn't execute the looters and the spreaders of chaos now, the entire city would descend into madness, and I'd have to kill thousands later. This was the same rule followed by the greatest generals in history. Those 5 heads were lined up next to Su Bingxia. Their eyes were still wide open, staring at the horizon. Their mouths hung agape, frozen in their final moments of terror. Blood dripped down the stone walls, staining the ground below. By noon, their crimes were read aloud to the entire city. The people were stunned. The message was clear. The old rules were dead, and I was just getting started.